My latest inspiration has been coming from a pastor by the name of Rob Bell, and he's a pastor up in Michigan who has some wonderful videos out, and they're called Pneuma. And in one of those videos, he talks about something that's always kind of been interesting to me. If you ever read the Gospels and Jesus' calling of the disciples, his followers, you notice that they don't think it over. You know, Jesus tells them, "Come and follow me," and they just drop what they're doing and they follow Jesus. And it kind of seems odd, doesn't it? I mean, they don't go home and talk it over with their families. They don't kind of weigh out the pros and cons of this. They just drop what they're doing and they follow Jesus. And it's always seemed kind of difficult to grasp that. And I know there's a lot of things in the Bible that are kind of hard to understand, but this is one where I never really got a good answer from. I mean, some people would say, well, you know, there was just this aura about Jesus, and it was so godly and so irresistible that they couldn't help but just drop what they were doing and follow Jesus. I'm not buying it. And I'm not buying it because a lot of people said no to Jesus. And in the end, we actually wound up killing Jesus, so I don't think it was divine aura here at work. And Rob Bell offers kind of an interesting take on this. And he says, you have to understand what the society was like in Jesus' day. In Jesus' day, the most respected people in the country amongst the Jewish community were the rabbis. Okay, they were the teachers, the religious leaders, and they were the most respected people. And they would take young boys, and they would take them from the best families, and they were the best and the brightest kids, and they would kind of apprentice them to themselves. And you had to be really the A team to get hooked up with a rabbi. And they would take them as young as 6 years old, and they would put them through this very rigorous training. It was kind of a 3-step training, and by the time you were 14 years old, you had memorized the entire Hebrew Bible, what we call the Old Testament. Imagine that. I'm lucky if I know the names of the books. And they memorized every word of it, front to back. And not only that, but they would also learn their rabbi's take on the scriptures, their rabbi's insights into what these texts mean and how we're supposed to live them out as the people of God. And there was this saying amongst the Jewish community, may you follow so close to your rabbi that you will be covered in the dust of your rabbi. You'll be covered in the dust of your rabbi. In other words, you're going to follow your rabbi around, and so closely that the dust he kicks up along the way will get on you. And it's another way of saying, may you be covered in the wisdom and in the insight and in the holiness of your rabbi. And to be chosen to do this work meant that you were the best of the best. Now, you might not have made the cut, and you might have interviewed with a rabbi, and he would ask you some questions about your knowledge of the scriptures, and maybe you weren't the best of the best, and he might say to you, it's obvious you love God, and it's wonderful that you want to serve God, and you could probably do that best by learning the trade that your father does. And maybe your father's a fisherman or a carpenter or some other job, and that's the best way that you can serve God. In other words, sorry, but you didn't make the cut. Now, Jesus comes along, and he doesn't ask the best of the best to follow him. He comes to people who you might think of as kind of the B team, the people that didn't make the cut with all the other rabbis. And he comes along to people like fishermen, and he says, follow me. And so they have this choice. They could keep doing this back-breaking work and smell like fish all day, or they could follow a rabbi around and move from the B team to the A team. And they could now kind of rub elbows with the elite in society. I wonder what I'm going to do here. I'm going to just drop what I'm doing and follow Jesus, because this was like This was like winning the lottery. You know, I can stop doing this backbreaking work, and I can follow a rabbi, and I can get to know this rabbi so well that I'll get covered in the dust of my rabbi, and I'll learn all of his wisdom and insight, and I'll follow him around and imitate what he does. And this is really what the disciples, the followers of Jesus, want to do. They really just want to get close to Jesus, to their rabbi, and learn from him. And of course, they want to kind of be seen in the society as now having taken a leap from the B team to the A team, and now they're gonna rub elbows with the best and the brightest, and say, you know, we made it too. And so Jesus does, in fact, begin to expose them to some people, but not the people they expected. Instead, he brings them to people who couldn't even make the B team. He brings them to people who are poor, and people who are hungry, and people who are sick, and people who are disabled, people who are possessed by demons. And you can imagine the disciples are thinking to themselves, I didn't sign on for this. You know, I gave up a bad job to get a better job, and to kind of move my way up in society and climb the ladder. And yet Jesus isn't taking us to the people in power. He's taking us to the people who are on the bottom rung of society. And not only that, but he's telling us, well, you come to serve them. Okay? So they do what their rabbi tells them to do, and Jesus kind of sends them out on these missionary journeys, and they get really excited because they find out that they can do things in Jesus' name. They can heal people just like Jesus does, and they can feed hungry people, and they can do all kinds of things, and they get really excited about this. And they come back from these journeys, and they want to debrief with Jesus. And they want to tell him all that they were able to do, and probably get a nice pat on the back from Jesus, because we're really getting it, aren't we, Jesus? Right? We're doing all the things that you do, that we've watched you do. So we're doing good, right? And they want to have this private time with Jesus. And so they go off for one of these private moments, but unfortunately for them, the crowds hear that Jesus is in town, and they come flocking to him. A multitude of people, thousands and thousands of people, 5,000 folks. And this is the way they counted in those days, 5,000 men, plus women and children. You know, it's kind of a sexist society, so they only counted the men. So there's probably more than 5,000 people. There's a great multitude of people, and Jesus is healing people, and he's teaching the people, and the disciples are probably getting pretty aggravated at this point, because they want to talk about what they've been able to do in Jesus' name, and they want to have this private time with their rabbi and get covered in the dust of all of Jesus' teachings. And so it gets to be about this time of night, and they say to Jesus, it's getting to be about supper time here, Jesus. Why don't you send them away? Send them away so they can go get some food, and we can have our one-on-one time, the stuff that we signed on for. And Jesus says, why don't you give them something to eat? Now imagine that Jesus says this to us here tonight. He comes to True North and he says, I got 5,000 folks to be fed. You give them something to eat. Yeah. How are we going to do that? Monica, in her blog, she's always very honest. I love Monica's honesty. And she says, she kind of relates to the disciples that she understands that Jesus is talking to us too, and not just the disciples way back when. He's telling us to feed hungry multitudes, and Monica says, I don't know how to do that. And truth is, I really don't either, Monica. She said, I hope John has some good ideas about this, but no, I have no clue. I mean, if I could do that, I'd probably have a really high-paying job. Okay? So, I don't know what I'm doing. But Jesus says, you give them something to eat, and they're scratching their heads, and they look at the little food pantry they've got. They said, we've got a couple of fish and 5 loaves of bread. That's not going to go very far amongst 5,000 people. And here's the thing. There's a difference of vision here. Jesus sees abundance, and we see scarcity. Jesus sees opportunity, and we see